This is Planet Poet Words in Space here at WIOX. I'm your host, Sharon Israel. It's my privilege to have the renowned award-winning poet Arthur Vogelsang as my guest on the phone from Los Angeles. Hi, Arthur.
Hi, Sharon.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here in spirit.
Well, we're very far away, but I have been in the Catskills.
You sound very close by. You have been in the Catskills. Yeah, they're very beautiful right now and much, much cooler than New York City.
I'm from Baltimore, and my wife and I lived in New York for a couple of years.
Uh-huh. I wanted to give our listeners a little bit of your background. Arthur Vogelsang is the author of 7 books of poetry, including 20th Century Women and Cities and Towns, which received the Juniper Prize. His work has been included in numerous anthologies, such as the Best American Poetry, the Pushchart Prize, the new Breadloaf Anthology of Contemporary Poetry, and American Hybrid. Arthur was co-editor of the Norton Anthology, The Body Electric, America's Best Poetry from the American Poetry Review. He is a recipient of the California Arts Council Fellowship and 3 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships in Poetry. Arthur's newest book, Orbit, was published this year by University of Pittsburgh Press. I think we're going to start right away with a poem.
Okay, I thought I'd read this poem called 1948, the year 1948.
And that's from your new collection?
Yes, it is. So,
okay.
1948. I just can't believe you think the camel likes the desert. What? Its special hooves? It is enamored of them? Its water storage faculty? It is so proud of that? The movies you see of the camel smiling in the desert? As a child, a rabid thinker, I thought the zoo was a collection of rare, unique animals. For instance, there were only 3 elephants in the world, and these were them. There were only 2 polar bears, these. The one camel seemed most like me. It liked the shade of its big flat cactus. It liked its trough filled with a hose. It liked a coconut chocolate bunny I illegally offered through the bars, which it took carefully of my hand. It hated the desert, like we all do.
That's Arthur Vogelsang reading his poem 1948. That is such a charming poem, but it's very conversational, and it also brings us back to sort of a myopic viewpoint of a child.
Well, it just seems to me that the focus in the poem is number 1 on the camel, what the camel's like, but also number 2 on the speaker, what he's like.
Right.
and the 2 focuses, on the camel and the speaker, are about equal. Another correspondence between the camel and the speaker is that we see them each in 2 places. For the camel in the zoo and in the desert, and for the speaker as a child and as an adult thinking about the experience.
Right.
So, for me, the writing of the poem, a lot of the pleasure of it was in working out that exchange, that form.
The different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Reflecting.
And that the speaker was a character in the poem, just
yes.
like the camel was.
Yes, and and the poem itself sort of combines the child and adult very well. I mean, the poet, you're an adult, of course, but the illegal offering of the chocolate bunny, to me, somehow that's the center of the poem. I don't know why. But, so you're bringing up one of the most interesting things about your poetry. I mean, I have read your poems, and the more I read them, the more unusual they become, and for various reasons. And the viewpoints are sort of mirrored one to the other. And
Thanks.
yeah, well, the second poem that you have that I would love you to read, and you have selected is called "Mirror One Carries Along a Road." It's placed right next to 1948 in the volume orbit, and it sort of mirrors the poem. I guess they all mirror each other in odd ways, but the mirroring of the different viewpoints. And I was intrigued by the title, and we had talked about it. "A mirror one carries along the road" is a quote by Stendhal.
Yes.
And I will read the quote. It says, "Ah, sir, a novel is a mirror carried along a high road. At one moment, it reflects to your vision the azure skies. At another, the mire of the puddles at your feet. And the man who carries this mirror in his pack will be accused by you of being immoral. His mirror shows the mire, and you blame the mirror. Rather blame that high road upon which the puddle lies, still more the inspector of roads who allows the water to gather and the puddle to form."
Okay, the poem doesn't know that much because it's from a child's point of view. I think I'll read it first before I say anything about what you said.
Okay.
Or about the poem. So the title is in quotes, "A mirror one carries along a road." End of quote. As a child, I wrote, and I thought, you don't have to do anything but begin at birth. You start it there and go on. Remembering is fun. What's all this blah about so tough to start a story? I thought, you just start where you began, squeezing out of mom, and write through memories at different speeds to get to what you want to talk about. Then you slow down and stay as long as you want. Sort of like Stendhal in a BMW speeding and holding his hand out the window with a camera. We could tell him a camera was like a mirror you turned on and off. He'd get it. I was only a child, but I thought this. I had not yet read Stendhal, of course. I read his quote above. Then I thought of the end in my method. The disgusting, unmerciful, no exceptions, black, smelly end. So that was why people started somewhere in the middle and ended somewhere in the middle.
That's Arthur Vogelsang reading his poem, "A Mirror One Carries Along a Road."
Want me to chat about that a little bit?
Oh, please. About it.
Maybe gradually as we talk during this time, during this hour, I can do that. I prefer to write poems in something that's like a heightened conversation people would have if it was a crisis in their lives, and they were being calm about it. Something like that. But about this poem, before we get too far from it, "A mirror one carries along a road," and the method of writing that the child invented. It's more or less a true story about me, though I don't think as a child I had the writing process so completely worked out or understood. So the adult speaker here in this poem is helping out the child, so to speak. The poet is helping a character in the poem with the character's dilemma. So the speaker is no longer me or the poet, but is a character in the poem, too. That's what I think I've achieved, among other things there, and what grew to be in my mind and what was already there. So that's as much as we should say about it.
Well, that's hard. It's hard to separate the poem from the narrator, but it's sort of this matter of fact sort of wonder and asking why. As a child, I wrote, and what's all this blah about so tough to write a story? Obviously, that may be the character because the child doesn't know what's ahead in terms of the difficulty.
Yeah, and the
Is that
child
right?
is overconfident.
Right.
Overconfident and single-minded.
Right. But the image of Stendhal in a BMW, that's a great image. And modernizing the mirror with a camera. So you turned on and off, he'd get it. A camera was like a mirror, you turned on and off, he'd get it. So is that the poet describing this to the characters, to both? It's a little hard to separate, but that's the joy of it.
It's hard to separate it, isn't it? Especially after my explanation. I would say just trying to step back from the poem and just be a reader. He'd get it. Was said by the child who knows about cameras and mirrors, and by the controlling adult speaker poet.
And the one who is aware of what's going to happen at the end to everybody.
Yeah, that's the child's revelation. Now, I don't know how true that is, but certainly it's a portion of things, a portion of life, and a portion of a restriction in writing. If you don't want to be entirely negative.
Yes. Both poems are so very different from each other, and I wanted to read a quote from John Yao. Is that how you pronounce his name? John
Yao, yes.
John Yao's review in Hyperallergic.
Hyperallergic. It's a new review website that's a kind of art literary website. It reviews a lot of art. John's been a professional art critic much of his life, besides a poetry teacher and poet.
I've been following it since you introduced the online journal to me. And they just have an article today, as a matter of fact, about women sort of relatively unknown as abstract artists. But he says about your poems, the logic governing the poems is only good for the one ride you take on the mind-spinning journey that is the particular poem. Bringing the same set of expectations to each poem does not work. The reader has to start over, to be pulled into the poem's orbit. And I was intrigued by what he said. I loved the way he put it, but that makes sense of why you called your book Orbit. Do you agree with that?
Well, I called it Orbit because of its viewpoint and its the fact that an orbit takes place around the living planet, even though it's so far away. I tried to make close things far away. I tried to make far away things close, and I guess I tried to make close things far away. I think that John is right when he says bringing the same set of expectations to each poem does not work. It's what same set of expectations in each work is what I don't like
right.
much of contemporary poetry. Personally, that is, I can't do it that way.
You mean some poets write to keep a theme going or a particular
They write to
voice.
keep their style and their brand going, as we say. Lately, in the past 5 years, we have these snappy new words like brand.
That's so awful for a poet to be to have a brand, but I guess...
I think many of them are.
I want to read a little bit of where you've lived. You've moved around a lot in your life, I think.
Yes.
Arthur was born in Baltimore and has lived there in New York City, Iowa City, Wichita, Philadelphia, Paris, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, places he has been employed as a teacher, including the University of Southern California, the University of Nevada, and the University of Iowa. He was the editor of the American Poetry Review from 1973 to 2006. And that's a long time to be an editor. I can't imagine how many poems you've gone through in that time.
Yeah, well, I liked it very much, and I liked bringing it to the public. The magazine was set up to do that with its newsstand distribution and its large subscription list. And it's sort of economy of scale because it is a tabloid newsprint and cost incredibly low amounts to produce each copy compared to, say, a literary journal. Yeah, my teaching was not really as much time. I only taught graduate poetry workshops, except a couple of times, when I could and when I wanted to, which I find that to be a lot of fun because the students aren't like students, they're just sort of like other writers that you talk to, and they're also a little older if they're in MFA programs.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I want to talk about something that John Yao said about you, and he knows you through your editorship of the review, and he talks about you as an outlier. He says outliers are seldom the focus of literary conferences and hardly ever appear in name or face on the covers of either hip or mainstream poetry magazines. In the case of Vogelsang, this is ironic because for many years he was one of the editors of the widely distributed newsstand magazine, American Poetry Review, where he published and promoted many writers, including me, meaning John Yao.
Yeah.
And he says, it seems to me that being an editor of a mainstream poetry magazine often disqualifies you from getting your own books reviewed because, especially in the case of Vogelsang, you haven't turned that position in a way of exchanging favors. In all the years that I have known him, we met at a party for the review at the once famous, now closed Gotham Book Mart, located at 51 West 47th Street in the mid-'70s. He has never once asked me to review his work, write a blurb, or even say something nice about his work in public. Such exemplary behavior should not go unnoticed. I guess that's not in the sort of poetry scene, usual poetry speak scene.
I guess I felt I'd always get rewarded for doing that someday, and this radio program and you reading that and his review is all my reward.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. I felt so nostalgic reading that because I loved the Gotham Book Mart. It was one of the first bookstores I've ever went to in New York City, and was located smack in the middle of the jewelry district. And
yeah, it had a couple of locations. You know, we talked before on the phone before this interview, and I knew you were going to ask about the Gotham Book Mart. So I copied this from the New York Times, which I think was in an article that when the store closed in 2007.
Oh.
And it's just a few sentences, but it's quite amazing. So I'm going to read that now about the Gotham Book Mart. The Gotham Book Mart was founded on West 43rd Street in 1920 by Francis Stelloff. It was the haunt of literary figures like Theodore Dreiser, John Dos Passos, H.L. Mencken, Arthur Miller, John Updike, J.D. Salinger, and Eugene O'Neill. It exhibited the works of the artist Edward Gorey.
Edward Gorey, yeah.
Oh, and by the way, it exhibited a lot of paintings all the time.
I remember the gallery.
Yeah, its customers included George and Ira Gershwin, Charlie Chaplin, Alexander Calder, Stephen Spender, Woody Allen, Saul Bellow, Katharine Hepburn, and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. At various points, Allen Ginsberg, Leroy Jones, and Tennessee Williams worked as clerks there. When it moved, I forget where it moved to, somewhere in the 80s. Or it came, it moved to the 80s.
Before it moved to West 47th?
I can't remember.
Yeah, because I think it closed on 47th.
I met John Yao there at a book party thrown by the publisher Daniel Halpern for a book he was publishing by Stanley Plumley, the poet, and a reprint he was making of one of John Ashbery's books. John Yao was a student of John Ashbery at Brooklyn College then, and John and I kind of hit it off right away. They had many of the books that were banned, Henry Miller, Allen Ginsberg, and James Joyce, for sale. And I think John, the Gotham Bookmart thing came into my association with John Yao because, and the other nice things you've said about me being an editor and not using that as a political position or a power lever. I, edited and published American Poetry Review for 33 years. I began in my early 30s with Stephen Berg and David Bonanno, who were co-editors, co-publishers, and they had been with the magazine at its founding, which was a few months before I came. And I really liked this going the editor route for my job and my career because it seemed to be in touch with what was being written successfully in the immediate present, and had the practical, also had the practical satisfying value of spreading that writing to a more general public than the one department in the university community.
Yes, it's a lot of people.
Anyway, while I was doing all this for all these years, I was writing books, and I managed to keep my poetry writing very separate from what happened when I worked at the American Poetry Review, and it was difficult. And
to have the time, I would imagine, also.
Well, the time, yeah, but all of the people and the influences of the people you talk to. I talked on the phone constantly, daily, to people about poetry in general, besides arranging their publications, and there were all those influences and things that I didn't go along with, and it was an interesting thing. And I think John is being very kind in his writing about what I did with, on the one hand, being a poet, which begins as a very private, personal thing, and then tries to communicate with the stranger reader, and all that on the one hand, and on the other hand, being an editor who supported other people's work.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it was, and I very, very much appreciate your reading John's description.
Yes, I loved his whole review, and I wanted you to read another poem for us. But before that, you were included in a book that I bought from Norton that has several anthologies about poetry, and you were included in their book American Hybrid. The editors, David St. John and Cole Swenson, defined the hybrid poetry as the combination of two camps in poetry, the cooked and the uncooked, which I think is an expression that Robert Lowell invented. The romantic British tradition and French materiality, the transcendent and the immanent, the event on the page. It might include the narrative and some disruption of the narrative. The fabulous blurb that David St. John wrote about your poetry included in American Hybrid, and I know I'm giving a lot of accolades, but they help, I think, me and the listener understand sort of an expansive view of who you are in your poetry. And this is David St. John, who said, part vaudevillian, part shaman, Arthur Vogelsang celebrates the tenacious hopes of the hopeless and repeats aloud the snarling prayers of the lost. Voice-driven and maximal, each its own tonal high-wire act. Vogelsang's poems sear the imagination while either touching or ripping out the reader's heart. So everything I've read about you is very, very
I'm enjoying
impassioned.
this very much, reading all these blurbs.
It's very, very impassioned, and because the poetry is so unusual, and it's not. I guess it's intellectual because you're writing it down, and there are things you can explicate and points of view, etc. But it goes directly to the reader, and
yeah, and my poetry is hybrid. Well, at different times in my life, there were two big influences, John Donne and Frank O'Hara, who were sort of polar opposites that combine in my style and emotions and thoughts while I'm writing and while I'm living. again, at another period, I became absorbed with and had the influence of William Butler Yeats and Allen Ginsberg, who are more polar opposites that combine in my poetry. So I suppose that's a hybridic activity. Another thing that we've been talking about with these first few poems, another hybrid activity in my poetry is, the persona who narrates the poem. Usually the narrator has several models sit for his portrait. And then the portrait speaks. So it isn't really the poet, it isn't really the narrator, it's a character. And the same with most of the characters in my poems, the others other than the speaker. Sometimes the narrator is only me, but I don't know, I'm always reminded of what Carl Jung said, which is that we're each character in our dreams. I love that.
That's true.
And I think something like that happens in my poems. So they're hybridic because the characters are each other, and that includes the I.
And you embody
personal first-person pronoun.
And you embody each I.
I try.
Yeah.
I try.
Arthur, would you read, I think, the first poem in your new collection called Verde Valley, 1311 A.D.
All right, let me get to it here. All right. Verde Valley, 1311 A.D. Now, Verde Valley is an actual place. And it's in the American Southwest, and it was a civilization at its very height in about 1311 AD.
In the Southwest.
Yes. Okay, so Verde Valley, 1311 AD. Our empire became so strong and wide, we voted each and every person would go to heaven. Not unanimous, 79% to 10% with 11% abstained, but a clear mandate. Caused a few problems. Those buried vertically and those buried horizontally had to accept each other's ascension. Children were not people, and a dead child's spirit stayed with the mother until Ma's death, and then went up with her. Or, a safety net, a dead child's spirit could be transferred to the next baby of the mother. The mother, the next baby, and the dead child, who was not eligible due to not being a person, had to be near each other when transfer, death of Ma, or temporary residence of child's spirit in Ma occurred. So since all our floors were stone, and so were all our walls, we were a strong, wide, rich empire. We buried the children under the living room floor, or in the walls. We cut the naughty problem with one new custom. What's more, the vertical burial faction, 50% of us, and the horizontal, other 50%, troublesome assholes, each faction, had a convention and decided adults should be buried like this. There's a slash sign one way. Or this. There's a slash sign another way in the text. At any 45-degree angle. And that was that. As I come to you from very far away, though I am part of we who did this stuff, I also know the consequences of the unending spirit war in an increasingly overpopulated heaven. The smell of burning oil everywhere all the time. Nauseous heavenly odor.
That's Arthur Vogelsang reading Verde Valley, 1311 A.D. It is so peculiar because the narrator, speaking of narrators and their various eyes and the portraits and in your poetry. The speaker says, "I'm here with you now. I've traveled a long way to be here, to tell you what's going on." And it's a spirit describing a spiritual journey. Please correct me and add to what I'm saying. The spiritual journey in very factual, sort of like a financial analysis, or something very concrete. That's hilarious, but disturbing, very disturbing at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of dystopian. This was an actual place, Verde Valley, and these were actual customs. And I pushed them into very distantly implied comparisons to our time and place, and hoped that worked. I hope that the two eras kind of bleed into each other, and that the customs of 1311 A.D. suggest our situation.
They do. The line, "We buried the children under the living room floor," especially because I don't think they had living rooms in those days. Or they didn't consider
they had common rooms and
yeah.
portions of them. Yeah, I called them living rooms.
Yes.
To help connect.
Yes, yes. You did. And talking about the mother as Ma. I mean, so many of us call our mothers Ma, but there's something sort of iconic about it, almost Egyptian Ma. It becomes a spirit word.
It's a sound.
The sound of it. I don't know if you did that. Could you speak a little bit?
I tried.
Yeah, you did. You did. I keep reading things about you, and as long as you don't mind, I will continue to do so.
I don't mind at all.
Another John Yao quote: "By the time readers get this far into the poem, they had been pulled into Vogelsang's universe, which is governed by rules that they would more likely encounter in a science fiction novel. Everything is topsy-turvy, but somehow all makes sense," which I think is a lovely and very telling
I do too.
description.
I think the part that says everything is topsy-turvy, but somehow all makes sense is really great. But rules they would more likely encounter in a science fiction novel. I
That's
don't
a little much,
know about that, because you see, this stuff really did happen.
Yeah.
In this particular poem, and I think in many of my poems. But I think that John is getting at a kind of a cultural displacement that's in my poem.
Yeah, you sort of you remove yourself a little and then jump back in.
Yeah,
I think.
I think so.
Would you read another one for us, please?
Sure. You wanted me to read, I think, Our Voices in Love Lady?
Sure. If you'd like, or whatever. Or whatever else you would like.
You asked me to do that.
Yes.
And I have it marked off here in my book.
Great.
This is a poem that is from the 1980s. I should have these ready.
It's on page 38.
Poetry readings, they don't mind you shuffling through your poems.
Well, we're
on the radio, it's called Dead Air. I've got it here.
No, it's good.
I've got it. Our Voices in Love Ladies. Love Ladies is a shore town in New Jersey. And
so that's the actual name of the town.
That is the actual name. It's north of Atlantic City. And it's small, and it's known for a restaurant that people come to from all over the shore, as they call it in New Jersey.
This is from your time?
My friends and I went there a lot, and I had different friends. When I lived in Philadelphia, I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of people who were acquaintances' friends and friends' acquaintances. A lot of acquaintances and a lot of friends. But in any case, we were all sort of poets, and there was something that was common about us. I don't know, but in this case, here's what happened in Love Ladies. our voices in Love Ladies. He looked like a portable dream. He was forced to phone from a booth on a dune. His anger cheapened the big and the greater waves. We saw them tentatively wash toward him, like friends abandoned decades ago will approach. Back when the call seemed a good idea, we were not so much in pain as now, when the actuality of his taut body glass enclosed and linking up with his goddess, made us feel pity, nostalgia, injustice, and a character flaw we couldn't quite put our fingers on. Our friend, the gray young lady, came by, and we threw our arms around her. And she stayed, but said, "What the hell's going on in there?" Her salve for pity, nostalgia, and injustice was herself. As human behavior, it was hard, but open, and it worked, like salt water not from the ocean often will. Her personal habits were too frank. She left doors open. The sea fell back, aghast. We loved the miracle, which was however you describe something, it was actually that way for a few moments. And we would have liked to implore his goddess to sing. And when he came out of the booth, we all went into a street of slapdash wooden houses to cut ugly, stupid, delicious animals of the sea. This was in New Jersey in 1977, where writers were as exotic as sister ocelots that lived in a working man's house and naturally squatted over a toilet as if it were a stream.
That's Our Voices in Love Ladies, read by
I think
Arthur.
I was trying to really earn my right to say how exotic writers were and are.
It's got so much in it, you know, but he looked like a portable dream. Was he a more famous poet, or why?
I don't want to say, because he was a combo of characters and he was an actual person.
He was an actual person.
Yes, but to tell you the truth, I'm thinking now about correcting John Yao about the science fiction universe. Things happen that are actually stranger than science fiction, or more spectacular anyway.
Well, he was calling from a booth on the dune. I can just see that.
Yeah, and hopefully it isn't a poem that focuses on this person in the booth in the dune, but on everybody who is exotic.
And reacting to him, and then sort of like like the waves coming back and forth. It's but this was New Jersey in 1977, where writers were exotic as sister ocelots. I mean, that's this. I guess it's different now in the Jersey Shore. I don't know how many poets are still there, but
I haven't been back there in a long time, but I don't know what it's like.
Yeah, but there are many, many famous poets that come from New Jersey. I know that much. Including Robert Pinsky, and well, there were a few.
Jack Nicholson is from a town just north of Atlantic City.
Oh, yeah?
The town's so small, I don't think it has any name. Maybe Asbury Park.
Mm.
And Frank Sinatra is from New Jersey, somewhere near New York. And
I think it's from Hoboken.
From New Jersey?
Hoboken.
Chris Christie is from Hoboken?
No, Frank Sinatra was from Hoboken.
Oh, that was before it was gentrified.
Yes, very much so. There's another interesting quote from John Ashbery that's in your volume 20th Century Women. The world, you can please comment freely on this. The world, according to Vogelsang, is 3/5 reality and 2/5 dream, but the resulting surface is so artfully camouflaged that it's impossible to know which is which. And I think this poem really conveys that.
Okay.
This whole scenario.
Okay with me. That's okay with me. It's a very creative and original quote using 3/5 and 2/5.
Yes, I know. It's sort of like Verity Valley, you know. You have 10% and 59% or whatever percentages. I just want to say that this is Planet Poet, Words in Space, an edition of The Writer's Voice at WIOX Community Radio. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, here with my guest, award-winning poet Arthur Vogelsang. And when I first was introduced to you, Arthur, Vogelsang means bird song. Is that an alias or is that your real name?
It's my real name. It's my real name. It is as uncommon in Germany as it is here. But Vogel is a very common name there. I don't know if it's like Smith or Johnson. It might be more like Mitchell or I don't know. Not certainly Stein. Stein is very common. But anyway, Vogel is a very common name. Vogelsang is not.
Has anybody commented? I mean, it means bird song, I believe.
Well,
it's a great name for a poet.
Occasionally later, I have this terrible fantasy that someday there's going to be another poet who has that same name, and I don't want that to happen. I don't know. I don't know if it would be like a doppelganger, but I guess it would be. But I didn't. In my early days, it was just never mentioned. Poetry back then was in my family and around me. It was and is a rare, special activity.
Mm-hmm. So you
when I wrote when I was in my teens and even in college, I kept it a secret. And
you did.
Yes.
Did you write at home?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents were kind and brought me a typewriter because I said I needed it for school. A Remington. But I kept the fact of writing poetry a secret and said I had to go to the library for schoolwork when I had to go to find poetry books. Books weren't so available then, even in bookstores. And there's a great library in Baltimore, the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot of time there.
So you started reading poetry, and then you compelled to write?
Oh yes. And imitate and absorb and all that.
And you did it in secret. I find that fascinating. How long did?
Yeah, I had a couple of literary friends, but not many.
When did your parents find out you were writing poetry?
They knew. I got published when I was 17 in a little magazine and showed it to them, and they didn't have much reaction. I can't remember what the poems were like. And then every other year or so, I'd get something published somewhere. Mm-hmm. And then things kind of accelerated. Mm-hmm. Publishing.
I guess they got used to you being a poet after you started publishing.
Yeah, they did, but my family doesn't have much reaction. They don't read poetry.
Mm-hmm. We had conversed before the show, and I would love you to share with us how you write and the state of mind that you are in when you do write.
Well, I know from memory that it's a very special place. It's like Hemingway's clean, well-lighted place. It's a very present tense thing. It does things like make my age go away, which I'm not comfortable with. Any anxieties I have, even mundane, important things like finances, I don't think about them. I do the poetry, and how I enter that place, I don't know. I think the impulse to art is an impulse that's genetic and biological, and you feel like doing it like you feel like doing almost anything. I can't always try to start a poem and have it happen. Shapes and memories and a sound coalesce in my mind and in daily life, and there we go. I don't write on the back of envelopes or keep a journal. I kind of use my desk as a studio, like a painter's studio. He goes in there and has one purpose. He's not going to go in the studio to, have dinner or anything but paint or sculpt. So, but still, I can't always try to start a poem and have it happen. Sometimes I can, but the impulse has to be there, together with the sounds and the memories and the forms and what's happening in my daily life. Also, what I'm reading. So that's kind of how it happens. You are, I think, people who are poets and do it, as T.S. Eliot said, if you do it past the age of 25, you're a serious poet. But if you keep at it, I think most people are in the same position as what I've just described.
And you write, you formulate, you work in your head also. I know.
Yeah, sometimes I'll have a lot of it worked out. Sometimes I'll just start with a line. Sometimes it'll be a line, like Robert Frost said, the beginning of a good poem is a place where emotion and thought meet. He simplified things in a very brilliant way a lot of times. That happens, and then sometimes that line will become the last line of the poem, or the last few lines. Things are moved around a lot. And that I don't consider that rewriting. I just consider the whole thing as part of the writing process.
Yes.
When I rewrite, I love to rewrite. And I'm in that clean, well-lighted place then, too. It takes longer to rewrite than it does to write something original for me. And again, I think for most poets.
Oh, thank you for sharing that one. That's wonderful. You also have an unusual take on the size of poetry books. If it's sort of biologically oriented, if you could explain.
Oh, I have this crazy idea. I've tried it out on other poets, and they say, that's very interesting. Why don't you write an essay about that? But the idea is just basically, isn't it strange that all poetry books are the same size? They're 60 to 80 pages. I don't think it's an economic thing. I've been in publishing a long time, and different size books will cost different things and have different audiences, whether it's a cat book or a John Updike book or Dostoevsky or me. But I think that poets write books that are 60 to 80 pages because that, again, has something to do with human biology. I think it's from starting to completing an action that is a biological action. It's an organic thing with your thoughts and your emotions.
You also talk about good exhaustion.
Yeah, and a whole book is 60 to 80 pages, 60 to 90 pages. There's some rare exceptions like lifelong projects like Ezra Pound's cantos. But he wrote them in sections also that were about that size. And then called the whole thing one big Mishikas. But anyway, I do think that most poets are obeying a biological impulse when they write a poetry book. It's scattered, it's here and there. It could take 3 years, or it could take 1 year, or it could take 6 years. But nevertheless, there it is, and that's what I think about that. I want to read my Raymond Chandler poem called Raymond Chandler. And in the poem, there's Raymond Chandler himself. There's his generic hero, which is kind of in all of his books. And there's me, who's the author speaking, who acts in the poem. And I like this poem because sometimes two of the characters are doing or saying what's being said or done, and sometimes all three are at once are doing this, and sometimes only one of them is doing or saying what's being said or done. In any case, the poet speaks to us directly at the end and defines himself differently from the Chandler hero or the Chandler narrator. And rather than explain that, I think I'll read the poem.
Wonderful.
All right. It's Raymond Chandler. One sought an utter purging of emotions, which led him into a voodoo church in a Los Angeles canyon, where there's a clothesline in the long room with many and various objects. The line or rope stretched between two poles is operated by a pulley, and the apparatus, with its hanging shoes, clocks, underwear, utensils, seashells, matchbooks, staplers, feathers, towels, hammers, is the only thing in the room. No chairs or podiums or statues, just the clothesline, with its paper clips, photos, oranges, cigarettes, bananas, needles, twigs, flashlights, sandwiches, which have to be changed every week, coat hangers, glasses, keyboards, stuffed toy bears, two side by side, and more objects dangling unidentifiable at first sight without time to stare, as he sought an utter purging of emotions, not for himself alone, but for others too. He thought, no, not here. I need a maturity in the people which is not here, a magnitude in the theme which is not here. Plus, their fate may not be accidental, nor may mine. No, not here. There was room on the rope for more stuff, and another empty rope strung waiting on the pulley. He felt he had hit bottom. The previous day, he had been searching in the great libraries at UCLA and USC and had come up empty-handed, and then driving away along Jefferson, made a wrong turn into a ghetto street with several gang members on it parked in two cars, and the ghost of Anna Akhmatova, the Russian poet, 1888 to 1966, walking straight toward him on the sidewalk and signaling him to roll down his window. The ghost was untouchable, even by the gang, because you could see through her, and it told our hero, you are searching for someone to whom it is impossible to give anything, and from whom it is impossible to take anything away. He did not follow her implied advice and give up seeking. He back out onto Jefferson and determined to try one more day. Had dinner with friends, breakfast in his room, and then, against the ghost's advice, he had asked her about the place, unfortunately found the voodoo church and stepped in. Bitter and disappointed he stood, a desiccated mannequin of a person. Now he, our hero, is not me. Every year or so, I go and pull the pulley back and forth, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. There is a little senseless energy in it. There is a little disequilibrium, and then a little equilibrium.
Arthur Vogelsang, thank you so much for reading that and for an intriguing hour of you and your poetry. Please come back. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.